Imagine pulling a single penny from your pocket and realizing it might be worth more than a full jar of loose change. What if that tiny copper coin sitting quietly in a drawer right now has a story that connects to history, rare mistakes, and collectors willing to pay hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars? Today, we're uncovering the true story behind the 1960 no mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin that looks ordinary but holds far more intrigue than most people ever realize. The 1960 no mint mark Lincoln penny is a 1-cent coin produced by the United States Mint in Philadelphia. Because Philadelphia coins didn't carry mint marks at that time, the absence of a letter under the date is completely normal. Millions of Americans have handled these coins without ever suspecting they might be special. But behind this everyday penny lies a fascinating blend of history, design changes, and rare varieties that have made this date one of the most talked-about Lincoln cents among collectors. To understand this coin, we have to go back to 1960, a year of big transitions in America. The country was stepping into a new decade filled with optimism, innovation, and cultural change. The space race was underway, television was reshaping American life, and families across the nation were experiencing post-war prosperity. During this time, the Lincoln cent was already one of the most familiar objects in American wallets. First introduced in 1909 to honor Abraham Lincoln's 100th birthday, it was the first U.S. coin to feature a real person. By 1960, the design had become a symbol of stability and continuity in American money. The Lincoln penny in 1960 still featured the classic portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the front, designed by Victor David Brenner. Lincoln's calm expression, sharp profile, and simple design had remained mostly unchanged for over 50 years. On the back of the coin, instead of the Lincoln Memorial we know today, Americans still saw 2 wheat stalks framing the words 1 cent. This design, known as the wheat reverse, had been used since 1909 and symbolized America's agricultural strength and growth. Interestingly, 1960 was the final year that the wheat reverse design appeared on the Lincoln penny. Starting in 1959, the Lincoln Memorial design was introduced, but some leftover wheat reverse dies were still in use into early 1960. This overlap makes the year especially intriguing to collectors because it marks the end of an era in U.S. coinage. Now let's talk about what makes the 1960 no mint mark penny unique beyond its history. First, there's the metal. In 1960, pennies were still made of 95% copper and 5% zinc and tin. That gives the coin a warm reddish tone when new, which collectors describe as red. Over time, exposure to air and moisture causes copper to darken into brown shades. Coins that remain bright red after decades are far rarer and more valuable. But the real excitement around the 1960 penny comes from its varieties and errors. That year is famous for having both large date and small date versions. At a glance, they look almost identical, but when you compare them closely, the difference becomes clear. The large date version has thicker numbers, while the small date version has thinner, more delicate numerals, especially noticeable in the 6 and the 0. These small design tweaks might seem insignificant, but in the world of coin collecting, they can mean the difference between a common coin and a highly desirable one. Even more fascinating is the 1960 doubled die penny. A doubled die occurs when the coin die receives a misaligned impression during its creation, causing parts of the design to appear doubled when the coin is struck. On some 1960 pennies, collectors can see doubling in the date or lettering, especially in Liberty and In God We Trust. These coins were released into circulation and spent like normal pennies, but today they are considered true mint errors and can command serious premiums. So why is the 1960 no mint mark Lincoln penny considered valuable by collectors? The answer lies in condition, rarity of varieties, and historical interest. Most 1960 pennies are worth just a few cents, especially in circulated condition. But coins in uncirculated condition, especially those with full red color, can be worth significantly more. Add in the small date variety or double die errors, and suddenly you're looking at a coin that could be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Let's look at some real examples to bring this into perspective. A standard 1960 no-mint mark penny in average circulated condition typically sells for only a few cents. However, in uncirculated condition with bright red color, these coins can sell for $10 to $25, and sometimes more depending on quality. A certified small date variety in high grade has sold for several $100s at auction, and the most impressive sales involve double die examples. Some well-preserved 1960 double die pennies have sold for over $1,000, and in exceptional cases, even higher. These prices might sound surprising for a penny, but in the coin world, rarity and condition are everything. Millions of 1960 pennies were minted, but only a small fraction survived in pristine condition, and an even smaller number contained notable errors. That combination of age, design history, and scarcity fuels collector demand. Now, if you're wondering how to tell whether you have a genuine 1960 no-mint mark penny and not a fake or altered coin, there are a few simple things to look for. First, check the date. It should clearly read 1960 with no mint mark beneath it. If there's a D or S, it came from Denver or San Francisco, not Philadelphia. Next, examine the coin's weight. A genuine copper penny from this era should weigh about 3.11 grams. A significantly lighter coin could be damaged, altered, or counterfeit. For small date versus large date identification, look closely at the shape of the numbers. On the small date version, the 6 appears more closed, and the 0 looks rounder and more compact. On the large date, the numbers are thicker and take up more space. Using a magnifying glass or phone camera can make this much easier. For double die varieties, look for doubling that appears raised in part of the design, not flat or scraped. True double dies will show clear separation lines in letters or numbers, especially in Liberty and the date. Machine doubling, which is common and far less valuable, usually looks flat and shelf-like rather than bold and rounded. As for fakes, most counterfeit pennies are crude and easy to spot. Altered dates sometimes involve carving or adding numbers to make a common coin look rare. Under magnification, these alterations often appear rough or uneven. If you ever suspect you've found something valuable, the safest step is to have it examined by a professional coin dealer or a third-party grading service. Now let's talk about some fun and surprising facts about the 1960 no-mint mark Lincoln penny. First, it belongs to the final chapter of the wheat cent series, one of the longest-running designs in U.S. coinage history. For 50 years, Americans carried wheat-backed pennies in their pockets, and 1960 marked the end of that era. That alone gives the coin nostalgic appeal. Another interesting detail is how many people unknowingly saved these pennies. In the early 1960s, there were rumors that copper coins might be removed from circulation or that older pennies could become valuable. As a result, many families began saving jars of pennies. Some of those jars still sit in basements and attics today, untouched for decades. Inside them could be 1960 pennies in surprisingly good condition. It's also fascinating to think about where these coins have traveled. A single 1960 penny might have passed through dozens, maybe hundreds of hands. It might have paid for candy, newspapers, phone calls, or parking meters. Every scratch and mark tells a silent story of everyday life in mid-20th century America. Collectors love the 1960 penny for several reasons. First, it's accessible. You don't need thousands of dollars to start collecting Lincoln cents, and the 1960 penny is a perfect entry point. Second, it offers variety. Between large date, small date, and double die versions, collectors have multiple goals to chase within a single year. That sense of discovery keeps the hobby exciting. Third, it represents a transition. It stands at the crossroads between the traditional wheat cent design and the modern Lincoln Memorial reverse that followed. For many collectors, coins like this serve as historical bookmarks, reminding us of how American coinage evolves alongside society itself. Another reason collectors admire the 1960 penny is its copper content. Modern pennies, made mostly of zinc, simply don't have the same feel or color. Older copper cents have a weight and warmth that many people find appealing. Holding one is like holding a small piece of American industrial history, back when coins were made of metal that felt solid and lasting. What's also remarkable is how this coin teaches us about minting technology. The double die varieties show how coins were once made using hand-prepared dies and mechanical processes that allowed for small mistakes. Today's digital engraving and quality controls make such errors far less common. That makes older-era coins like those from 1960 even more intriguing to collectors. Now imagine this. Somewhere in your home, in a jar, drawer, or forgotten box, there might be a 1960 no mint mark penny sitting quietly, waiting to be noticed. Most people would overlook it as spare change, but someone who knows what to look for might spot a small date variety, a bright red uncirculated surface, or even a doubled die. In that moment, an ordinary penny transforms into a meaningful historical artifact and potentially a valuable collectible. This is the magic of coin collecting. It turns everyday objects into windows into the past. It reminds us that history isn't only found in museums or textbooks. Sometimes it's hiding in plain sight, jingling softly in our pockets, or resting unnoticed in a coin jar. The 1960 no mint mark Lincoln penny may not be the rarest coin ever made, but it holds a special place in American numismatic history. It marks the end of the wheat cent era, offers fascinating varieties and errors, and remains accessible enough for anyone to hunt. That combination of history, mystery, and possibility is exactly what draws collectors in. So the next time you come across a handful of old pennies, take a closer look. Check the dates, examine the numbers, tilt the coin under the light. You never know when an ordinary-looking cent might reveal an extraordinary story. Because sometimes the most valuable treasures aren't gold or silver. Sometimes they're copper, and sometimes they're already in your hands, quietly waiting for you to notice them. Imagine finding a single penny in your pocket chain that turns out to be worth hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars. Most people would walk right past it without a second thought. But what if that penny was from 1964, had no mint mark, and carried a hidden story that most collectors overlook? Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of the 1964 no mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin that looks ordinary at first glance but holds a powerful place in American coin history. This small copper cent connects to one of the most emotional moments in modern U.S. history, the final year of a major coin design era, and a time when pennies were still made from solid copper. And for collectors, that combination can mean serious value. The 1964 Lincoln penny was struck during a period of massive change in the United States. Just 1 year earlier, in 1963, the nation lost President John F. Kennedy, and his image would soon replace Benjamin Franklin on the half-dollar. But on the penny, Abraham Lincoln remained, continuing a design that had already been in use for over 55 years. This coin features the Lincoln portrait designed by Victor David Brenner, first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. By 1964, this design had become one of the most recognizable images in American money. The reverse side still showed the familiar wheat ears, which collectors now call the wheat penny design, even though the Lincoln Memorial reverse had already replaced it in 1959. Weight correction: by 1964, the Lincoln Memorial was already on the reverse, not wheat ears. That alone tells us something important. The 1964 penny belongs to the modern Lincoln Memorial era, but it was still made of solid copper, unlike later cents. That makes the 1964 penny special. It's part of the last full decade when U.S. pennies were made of 95% copper. Rising copper prices would eventually force the U.S. Mint to change the composition to cheaper metals in the early 1980s. So in many ways, the 1964 penny represents the end of an era of heavy, solid copper cents. Now let's talk about the no mint mark part. When a coin has no mint mark, it means it was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. In 1964, Philadelphia was producing coins in massive numbers to meet public demand. People were hoarding silver coins at the time because silver prices were rising, and that caused a shortage of everyday change. As a result, the U.S. Mint went into overdrive, striking billions of coins to keep the economy moving. In fact, in 1964 alone, over 2.6 billion Lincoln pennies were struck at the Philadelphia Mint. That's an enormous number. So at first glance, this might not seem like a rare coin at all. And in most cases, it isn't. But here's where the story gets interesting. While common examples are still only worth a few cents, certain versions of the 1964 no mint mark penny can be worth far more, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of dollars, depending on condition and errors. Let's look at the physical features of the coin. The 1964 Lincoln penny weighs about 3.11 grams and is made of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc. It has a rich reddish-brown color when well preserved and a warm tone that modern zinc pennies simply don't have. On the front, you'll see Lincoln facing right, with the words "In God We Trust" above his head, "Liberty" to the left, and the date 1964 to the right. There is no mint mark under the date, which tells you it was made in Philadelphia. On the back, the Lincoln Memorial dominates the design. Above it are the words "United States of America," and below that, 1 cent. Inside the memorial, if you look closely with magnification, you can even see a tiny seated statue of Lincoln, which makes this one of the few U.S. coins where the same person appears twice on both sides of the coin. Now here's where collectors really start paying attention. The value of a 1964 no mint mark penny depends heavily on condition. Most examples found in circulation today are worn, scratched, or discolored. Those usually sell for 2 to 5 cents, mainly for their copper value. But uncirculated examples, coins that were never used in daily transactions, can be worth much more. A bright red uncirculated 1964 penny in top condition can sell for $10, $20, $50, or even more, depending on grading. And in rare cases, coins graded at the highest levels by professional grading services have sold for hundreds of dollars. That's a massive jump from a 1 cent face value. But the real excitement comes from error coins. Some 1964 pennies were struck with minting mistakes that make them extremely valuable today. One of the most popular errors is the double die obverse. This happens when the coin die receives a misaligned impression during production, causing letters or numbers to appear doubled. On a 1964 double die penny, collectors often look for doubling in the date or in the words, "In God We Trust." Another valuable error is an off-center strike, where the coin wasn't properly aligned during minting, leaving part of the design missing. Depending on how dramatic the misalignment is, these coins can sell for hundreds of dollars. Then there are clipped planchets, where a piece of the coin blank is missing, usually from a minting sheet being improperly cut. These coins look like they have a bite taken out of them and are highly collectible. One of the most exciting and rare errors is the wrong planchet strike, where a penny design is accidentally struck on a blank meant for another denomination or even another metal. These mistakes are extremely rare and can sell for thousands of dollars if authenticated. Now let's talk about real-world sales. While most 1964 no mint mark pennies sell for just a few cents, high-grade examples and error coins have achieved impressive prices at auction. A top-condition 1964 penny graded MS67 red has sold for several $100s. simply because very few survive in that flawless condition. Error versions, especially doubled dies or off-metal strikes, have reached into the four-figure range. This shows something important. Even common-date coins can become valuable when they survive in extraordinary condition or feature unusual mistakes. And because billions of people have handled pennies over the decades, finding one in exceptional shape is far rarer than most people realize. So how do you identify a real 1964 no-mint mark Lincoln penny? And how do you avoid fakes or altered coins? First, check the date and the mint mark area. The coin should read 1964, and there should be no letter under the date. If you see a D or an S, it was minted in Denver or San Francisco, not Philadelphia. Second, check the weight. A genuine 1964 penny should weigh around 3.11 grams. If it weighs significantly less, it might be damaged, altered, or counterfeit. Third, examine the color and texture. Real copper pennies from this era have a distinct tone that looks different from modern zinc cents. If the surface looks unusual, bubbly, or plated, that can be a red flag. Fourth, use magnification to inspect the lettering and date. Look for signs of doubling, strange shapes, or uneven spacing. But also be careful, not all doubling is valuable. Machine doubling, which looks flat and shelf-like, is common and usually not worth extra money. True doubled dies show rounded, separated images and usually affect multiple areas of the design. Finally, if you think you have something special, the best move is to have the coin authenticated and graded by a professional service. This protects you from scams and gives your coin credibility in the marketplace. Here's a fun fact about the 1964 penny that most people don't know. Even though the Lincoln Memorial design began in 1959, many collectors still mentally associate older copper pennies with the wheat design. That makes the 1964 cent one of the last truly classic feeling. Lincoln pennies before modern minting methods and cheaper metals changed the character of U.S. coins forever. Another surprising detail is just how many 1964 pennies still exist today. Because of the massive production numbers and the durability of copper, these coins remain one of the most commonly found older cents in circulation. Many people unknowingly spend them every day, not realizing that some examples could be worth dozens or even hundreds of times their face value. Collectors also love the 1964 penny because it sits at the crossroads of history and affordability. Unlike rare gold coins or early American silver dollars that can cost thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, a 1964 penny lets beginners enter the hobby without spending much money. Yet at the same time, high-grade or error versions offer serious upside potential, which keeps experienced collectors interested. There's also something emotionally powerful about holding a coin from 1964. This was the year the Civil Rights Act was signed into law, reshaping American society. It was a time of cultural change, political tension, and hope for progress. The penny you hold today might have passed through countless hands during that historic era, buying newspapers, candy bars, or bus rides, silent witness to everyday life in mid-20th century America. That sense of connection is one reason coin collecting is so addictive. You're not just collecting metal, you're collecting stories. And the 1964 no-mint mark Lincoln penny has a story that blends mass production with hidden rarity, simplicity with surprising value, and everyday change with historical meaning. So the next time you see a handful of pennies on your dresser, in your car cup holder, or at the bottom of your pocket, don't rush past them. Flip them over. Look at the dates. Look closely at the details. Because somewhere out there, someone has already spent a 1964 penny that could have paid for groceries, gas, or even a vacation, and they never knew. And that's what makes this coin so exciting. It reminds us that treasure doesn't always come in gold bars or locked vaults. Sometimes, it comes in the smallest denomination of money we use every day, quietly waiting for someone curious enough to look twice. So keep your eyes open. Check your change. And who knows, the next 1964 no-mint mark Lincoln penny you find might not just be worth more than 1 cent. It might be your first step into a hobby that turns everyday objects into pieces of American history. Most people would walk past this penny without a second glance. It looks ordinary. It feels ordinary. But what if I told you that one small detail on a 1967 Lincoln penny could make it far more interesting, and in some cases, far more valuable than most people ever imagine? Today, we're diving into the story of the 1967 no-mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin that quietly carries one of the most fascinating chapters in modern American coin history. This penny isn't famous for being flashy. It's famous because of when it was made, why it was made, and what collectors still search for on its surface decades later. The 1967 Lincoln penny is a 1-cent coin from the Lincoln Memorial Series, which began in 1959 to honor the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. On the front, you see President Lincoln's profile, designed by Victor David Brenner. On the back, instead of wheat stalks like older pennies, you see the Lincoln Memorial Building in Washington, D.C., with a tiny statue of Lincoln visible between the columns. And here's something that often surprises people. This coin has no mint mark. That doesn't mean it's rare by itself, but the reason behind it makes this penny special. In 1967, the United States Mint made a bold decision that changed how coins looked for several years, and it all connects to a nationwide coin shortage that had Americans worried they wouldn't even have enough change for everyday purchases. To understand this penny, we need to go back to the mid-1960s. At the time, the U.S. was facing a serious coin shortage. People were pulling silver coins out of circulation, saving them, hoarding them, and sometimes even melting them down because silver prices were rising. This caused major problems for businesses, banks, vending machines, and everyday shoppers. The government needed coins fast and in massive quantities. So in 1965, 1966, and 1967, the U.S. Mint made a dramatic move. They removed mint marks entirely from coins. No D for Denver. No S for San Francisco. No identifying letter at all. The goal was to discourage collectors from hoarding specific mint issues and to keep coins flowing smoothly through the economy. That's why your 1967 Lincoln penny has no mint mark. It wasn't a mistake. It was policy. But that policy created something unique. Coins from these years became frozen in time, representing a rare moment when every penny, nickel, dime, and quarter in America looked the same, regardless of where it was struck. In 1967 alone, the mint produced more than 3 billion pennies. That's billion with a B. Most of them were made in Philadelphia, but without mint marks, you can't tell which facility struck your coin. That massive production number is why most 1967 pennies aren't rare in everyday condition. But rarity in coin collecting doesn't always come from how many were made. Sometimes it comes from how few survived in top condition, or from mistakes that slipped past quality control. Let's talk about what makes the 1967 penny physically unique. This coin is made of 95% copper and 5% zinc. The classic bronze composition used for Lincoln cents from 1909 until 1982. It weighs about 3.11 grams and has a smooth edge. Over time, copper reacts with air and moisture, so many 1967 pennies have turned brown or dark chocolate in color. But the most desirable examples are bright red or red-brown, showing minimal oxidation even after decades. On the front, Lincoln's portrait is strong and dignified, with the words "In God We Trust" above his head, "Liberty" to the left, and the date 1967 to the right. On the back, the Lincoln Memorial is shown in clean architectural detail, with United States of America at the top, 1 cent at the bottom, and EPLURIBUS UNUM across the center. At first glance, it's a very normal-looking penny, but collectors know this year holds hidden potential. The most interesting part of the 1967 penny isn't the regular version. It's the errors. Because the mint was producing coins at record speed, quality control wasn't perfect. And when mistakes happen in mass production, some of those mistakes become collectibles. One of the most famous errors on the 1967 penny is the doubled die obverse. This happens when the coin die receives a doubled impression during manufacturing, causing parts of the design, especially the date or lettering, to appear doubled when struck. On some 1967 pennies, collectors have found doubling in the words Liberty, in God we Trust, or even in Lincoln's profile. Another error type is off-center strikes. These occur when the blank coin isn't positioned correctly in the press, resulting in part of the design missing and blank space visible on one side. The more dramatic the off-center strike, the more collectible the coin tends to be. There are also clipped planchets, where a piece of the metal blank was missing before striking, creating a curved or straight edge cut from the coin. And then there are broad strikes, where the coin spreads out wider than normal because it was struck without the retaining collar. These errors aren't common, but they do exist, and that's where serious value can come into play. So how valuable is a regular 1967 no mint mark penny? In circulated condition, meaning it's been used in everyday transactions, most examples are worth only face value, or slightly more, usually between 1 and 5 cents. In nice uncirculated condition, especially with original red copper color, values rise. A clean, bright red example graded by a professional service can sell for anywhere from $10 to $30, and sometimes more, depending on eye appeal. But the real excitement comes from top-grade coins and errors. In recent years, some high-grade 1967 pennies graded MS67 red, meaning nearly perfect condition, have sold at auction for $300 to over $1,000. These coins are incredibly hard to find because copper softens over time, and most pennies from circulation get scratched, spotted, or toned. Even more impressive are rare error coins. Some double die 1967 pennies have sold for several $100s. Off-center strikes with dramatic displacement can reach $500 or more, and unique or extreme errors, especially ones verified by grading services, can sell for well over $1,000. That's a stunning jump from 1 cent to 4 figures, all because of tiny differences most people never notice. So how can you tell if your 1967 penny might be special? Start with the basics. Check the date. Make sure it clearly reads 1967. Then look closely at the front and back under good lighting, or better yet, with a magnifying glass or jeweler's loupe. Look for doubling in the letters. Pay special attention to Liberty, in God we Trust, and the numbers in the date. True double die errors will show rounded, raised doubling, not flat or blurry doubling caused by wear or damage. Next, check the alignment. Is the design centered? If part of the lettering or rim is missing, you might have an off-center strike. Measure the diameter if possible. A noticeably wider or misshapen coin could indicate a broad strike or other striking error. Also inspect the edge. If there's a curved bite-like section missing, that could be a clipped planchet, and weigh the coin if you have a digital scale. A normal 1967 penny should weigh around 3.11 grams. Anything significantly lighter or heavier could indicate an error or damage. One important thing to remember is that damage is not the same as a mint error. Coins can get bent, scratched, burned, or chemically altered after leaving the mint, and those changes usually reduce value rather than increase it. True mint errors happen during the manufacturing process, and they tend to have smooth, natural-looking surfaces instead of jagged or rough ones. If you think you've found something unusual, don't clean the coin. Cleaning almost always lowers collector value. Instead, store it safely in a holder or envelope and consider having it examined by a professional coin dealer or grading service. Now here's a fun fact that surprises many people. The 1967 penny is one of the last U.S. cents made entirely of copper, before rising metal prices eventually forced a composition change. In 1982, the mint switched to copper-plated zinc pennies, which are much lighter and sound different when dropped. That makes the 1967 penny part of the final era of traditional bronze American cents, something collectors truly appreciate. Another interesting detail is that in 1967, proof coins were not sold to the public. Normally, collectors can buy specially struck proof coins directly from the mint, but during the coin shortage, that practice was suspended. Instead, the mint produced special mint sets with slightly better quality coins, but even those are different from true proofs. That makes high-quality 1967 pennies especially appealing, because finding sharp, clean examples is harder than usual. There's also something quietly historic about holding a 1967 penny. This coin passed through American hands during one of the most turbulent decades in U.S. history. The Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, the space race, the Summer of Love. While people were watching moon launches on black and white televisions and listening to new music that reshaped culture, these pennies were quietly changing hands in grocery stores, gas stations, and movie theaters across the country. That connection to everyday life is part of what makes Lincoln cents so beloved. They're not rare gold coins locked in vaults. They're working-class coins, coins that lived in pockets, purses, and cash registers. And yet, some of them now sit inside protective cases, admired under lights at coin shows and auctions. Collectors love the 1967 penny for another reason too. It represents a challenge. Because so many were made, finding a truly top-grade example is difficult. And because the mint removed mint marks, collectors can't chase multiple versions of the same coin from different mints. Instead, the hunt becomes about condition, color, and errors. That turns even a common date into a treasure hunt. There's also the emotional factor. Many collectors today grew up in the 1960s and remember these coins from childhood. For them, a 1967 penny isn't just copper and zinc, it's memory. It's lunch money. It's a soda from a vending machine. It's a newspaper on the front porch. Coins like this connect people to their past in a physical way that few objects can. And let's not forget the thrill of discovery. Some of the most valuable error coins ever found weren't discovered in auctions or collections. They were found in pocket change, in rolls from the bank, in jars sitting on kitchen shelves. People opened a drawer, looked closely at an old penny, and suddenly realized they were holding something extraordinary. That's why the 1967 no mint mark penny still matters today. Most of them are ordinary, but some are not. And the only way to know the difference is to look. So the next time you see a penny dated 1967, don't toss it aside. Turn it over, tilt it under the light, check the letters, study the numbers, because hidden in that tiny circle of copper could be a story, a mistake, or a rarity that transforms a simple cent into something far more meaningful. In a world where most people rush past the small things, coins like this remind us that history often hides in plain sight. Sometimes, it's sitting quietly at the bottom of a drawer. Sometimes, it's in a jar of spare change. And sometimes, it's already passed through your hands without you ever noticing. The 1967 no mint mark Lincoln penny may look ordinary, but its story is anything but. It represents a moment when America changed its coins to solve a national crisis. It carries the final years of true copper pennies. It holds the possibility of rare errors worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars. And most importantly, it reminds us that even the smallest objects can hold the biggest stories. So keep looking, keep searching, because the next great discovery might not be in a treasure chest or a museum display. It might be right there in your pocket, waiting to be seen. Imagine pulling a single penny from your pocket and realizing it might be worth hundreds, maybe even thousands, not because it's gold or silver, but because of a tiny detail most people never notice. Today, we're uncovering the hidden story behind the 1971 no-mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin that looks ordinary but holds surprising secrets collectors actively hunt for. This coin is part of the famous Lincoln Memorial Cent series, one of the longest-running and most familiar designs in American history. The 1971 penny without a mint mark was struck in Philadelphia, where coins traditionally didn't carry mint marks at the time. Millions were made, and most people have handled one at some point without realizing it. But among these everyday pennies, a small number stand out, and those are the ones that can turn pocket change into something far more valuable. To understand why this coin matters, we have to go back to 1971. America was changing fast. The Vietnam War was still ongoing, inflation was rising, and everyday goods were becoming more expensive. The U.S. Mint was producing billions of coins to keep up with the growing economy and population. Pennies were essential for daily transactions, parking meters, vending machines, newspapers, and groceries all depended on them. The Lincoln cent had already been around for over 60 years by then. First introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th birthday of Abraham Lincoln, it was the first U.S. coin to feature a real person. By 1971, the design showed Lincoln's portrait on the front and the Lincoln Memorial on the back, a symbol of unity, democracy, and remembrance. It was a familiar image Americans trusted, and the coin quietly passed through millions of hands each day. The 1971 no-mint mark penny was made from 95% copper and 5% zinc. This was before the major metal change in 1982, when rising copper prices forced the mint to switch to copper-plated zinc. That makes 1971 pennies part of the final generation of solid copper cents, something collectors value today not just for history, but for weight, sound, and feel. If you hold one in your hand, the coin weighs about 3.11 grams and measures 19 millimeters across. The front shows Abraham Lincoln facing right, with the words "In God We Trust" above his head, "Liberty" to the left, and the date 1971 on the right. There is no letter under the date, meaning it was made in Philadelphia. On the back, you'll see the Lincoln Memorial with tiny statues between the pillars, and above it, United States of America and E Pluribus Unum, with 1 cent at the bottom. At first glance, it looks like any other penny, but collectors know that within large mintages, rare varieties and errors often hide, and that's where this coin becomes exciting. In 1971, over 2.9 billion pennies were struck in Philadelphia alone. That number makes the coin seem common, and in circulated condition, most examples are worth only face value. But rarity in coin collecting isn't always about how many were made. It's about how many survive in top condition and how many contain special mistakes or unusual characteristics. One of the most valuable versions of the 1971 no-mint mark penny is a high-grade example, a coin that never entered circulation and still looks brand new. These are called mint state coins. While millions were produced, very few were preserved perfectly. Most were scratched, stained, or worn down almost immediately. In top professional grades like MS67 or higher, these coins become extremely rare. At major auctions, pristine 1971 no-mint mark pennies have sold for several $1,000s, not because of age alone, but because of condition. Collectors pay big money for perfection. Even more valuable are error coins, mistakes that happen during the minting process. And the 1971 penny is known for several fascinating errors that can multiply its value dramatically. One of the most famous is the double die error. This happens when the coin design is accidentally stamped twice at slightly different angles, causing doubling in letters or numbers. On some 1971 pennies, collectors have found doubling on "In God We Trust" on the date or on Lincoln's profile. These coins can sell for hundreds to thousands of dollars depending on clarity and condition. Another sought-after error is the off-center strike, where the design is shifted and part of the coin is blank. Some 1971 pennies were struck 5%, 10%, or even 50% off-center. The more dramatic the shift and the more visible the date, the higher the value, sometimes reaching several $100s. Then there are broad strikes, where the coin wasn't properly held by the collar during striking, causing it to spread wider than normal. These coins appear slightly oversized and thinner than usual. While subtle, collectors recognize them instantly, and they often sell for premium prices. Clipped planchet errors are another category. These occur when the metal blank was cut incorrectly before striking, leaving part of the coin missing. A 1971 penny with a clean curved clip can be worth many times face value, especially if the date and design remain clear. Some of the rarest 1971 pennies also show die cracks, cut errors, or rotated dies, where the front and back aren't aligned properly. Each of these mistakes tells a story of the minting process: machines working at high speed, metal under pressure, and human systems that occasionally fail in fascinating ways. But even without dramatic errors, the condition alone can create value. Most 1971 pennies today are brown from oxidation and circulation wear. But red examples, coins that retain their original copper color, are much harder to find. These red coins command significantly higher prices, especially in high grades. At auction, certified 1971 no mint mark pennies, graded MS67 red, have sold for several $1,000s. Lower grades in MS65 or MS66 still regularly sell for $50 to $300 depending on demand. Error coins can exceed those numbers quickly, sometimes climbing into four figures. So how can you tell if you have a valuable one? First, check the date. Make sure it reads 1971 and that there is no mint mark under the date. No letter means Philadelphia. Then look closely at the surface. Is the coin shiny and bright red or dull and brown? Red coins are much more valuable. Next, use a magnifying glass to examine the lettering and numbers. Look for doubling, especially on "In God We Trust," the word liberty, and the date. Doubling that looks thick and clearly separated is more promising than simple wear or machine doubling. Then, check the edges and shape. Is the coin perfectly round, or does it look clipped, stretched, or off-center? Any unusual shape could indicate a mint error. Weigh the coin if you can. A genuine 1971 penny should weigh about 3.11 grams. A significant difference could indicate damage, wear, or a counterfeit, though counterfeits of 1971 pennies are extremely rare because most are not valuable enough to fake. Still, serious collectors always verify. Also, examine the color and surface texture. Genuine copper pennies from this era have a specific reddish tone and sound when dropped. If something feels off, too light, too dark, or oddly smooth, it's worth having the coin checked by a professional grading service. Now here's something surprising. Even though billions were made, many collectors struggle to find high-grade examples today. That's because pennies were considered disposable. People tossed them into jars, drawers, and coin rolls without thinking. Few were saved carefully in 1971 because nobody expected them to become collectible. Another fascinating fact is that the Lincoln Memorial on the back actually shows a tiny statue of Lincoln sitting inside. If you look closely enough, you can see his figure between the pillars. This makes the Lincoln Memorial cent the only U.S. coin to show the same person on both sides, a subtle design detail many people never notice. There's also a historical connection between this coin and the copper crisis that followed just a decade later. Rising metal prices forced the mint to change composition in 1982, ending the era of solid copper pennies. That makes the 1971 penny part of the final stretch of traditional U.S. cent production, a quiet ending to a century-old standard. Collectors love this coin not because it's flashy or ancient, but because it represents the everyday American experience. It passed through grocery stores, gas stations, lunch counters, and newspaper stands. It jingled in pockets and sat in cash registers during a turbulent time in U.S. history. And now, decades later, some of these humble coins have become prized collectibles. There's also something deeply satisfying about discovering value in something ordinary. The idea that a penny sitting in a jar could be worth hundreds or even thousands creates excitement, not just for collectors, but for anyone who enjoys the thrill of hidden treasure. That's why the 1971 no-mint mark Lincoln penny continues to attract attention. It's accessible, affordable to start collecting, and full of mystery. Anyone can search for one, and anyone could get lucky. You don't need a vault or a fortune, just curiosity and patience. Collectors also appreciate how this coin bridges generations. Many people alive today remember using these pennies in daily life. Finding one now feels like holding a small piece of personal history, a reminder of school lunches, bus fares, candy counters, and simpler times. And for serious numismatists, the hunt for perfect examples and rare errors makes the coin endlessly fascinating. Each discovery adds another chapter to the story of American coinage. So next time you come across a penny dated 1971 with no mint mark, don't dismiss it. Take a closer look. Tilt it under the light. Check the details. You might just be holding a rare variety or a pristine survivor that collectors would love to own. Because sometimes, the most ordinary-looking objects carry the most extraordinary stories. And sometimes, a single copper penny is more than spare change. It's a piece of history, a collector's prize, and maybe even a small hidden treasure waiting to be discovered. And who knows, the next time you reach into a jar, drawer, or pocket, the coin that changes everything might already be there, quietly waiting for you to notice. Imagine reaching into your pocket, pulling out a single penny, and discovering it might be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Not because it's gold, not because it's ancient, but because of a tiny detail almost nobody notices. Today, we're uncovering the story of the 1972 no-mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin that looks ordinary, but in rare cases has become one of the most famous pennies in American history. Let's start with what this coin actually is. The 1972 no-mint mark Lincoln penny was made at the Philadelphia Mint, which traditionally did not place a mint mark on coins during that time. So if you see a 1972 penny with no letter under the date, that's normal. But what's not normal, and what makes this year legendary, is that some of these pennies were struck with one of the most dramatic and valuable errors ever found on a modern U.S. coin. But before we get to that, let's step back into the early 1970s. In 1972, the United States was going through major changes. The Vietnam War was still ongoing. Gas prices were rising. The economy was shifting. And everyday Americans were using cash constantly, especially pennies, to buy groceries, pay tolls, and handle daily transactions. The Lincoln cent had already been in circulation for more than 6 decades, first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th birthday of President Abraham Lincoln. By 1972, the design was familiar and trusted. On the front, or obverse, was Lincoln's profile, designed by Victor David Brenner. On the back was the Lincoln Memorial, a design introduced in 1959. Inside the columns of the memorial, if you look closely, you can even see a tiny statue of Lincoln seated inside. One of the few times a real person appears twice on the same coin. That year alone, the Philadelphia Mint produced over 2.9 billion Lincoln cents. Yes, billion with a B. That massive number is why most 1972 pennies you'll find today are worth only face value, maybe a few cents more if they're shiny or uncirculated. But buried among those billions is a tiny group of coins that completely changed how collectors look at this year. These are the famous 1972 double-die obverse pennies. And this is where the story gets exciting. A double die happens when the coin's design is accidentally doubled during the creation of the die that strikes the coins. This isn't damage that happens after the coin is made. It's built into the design itself. So every coin struck from that faulty die carries the same dramatic doubling. In 1972, something went very wrong and very right for collectors during this process. On the rare doubled die version, the words "Liberty," "In God We Trust," and especially the date 1972 appear boldly doubled. Not blurry, not smeared, but clean, strong doubling that's easy to see with the naked eye. The numbers in the date almost look like they're stacked on top of each other. Once you see one, you never forget it. At first, nobody noticed. These pennies went straight into circulation. People spent them on candy bars, newspapers, parking meters, and coffee. They rattled around in pockets and cash registers for years before collectors started realizing something unusual was showing up again and again. When coin experts finally examined them closely, they realized this wasn't a small error. It wasn't a minor variation. It was one of the strongest double die obverse errors ever seen on a Lincoln cent, rivaling famous varieties like the 1955 double die and the 1969's double die. And suddenly, the humble 1972 penny became legendary. Now let's talk about what makes the regular 1972 penny special on its own, even without errors. The coin is made mostly of copper, about 95% copper and 5% zinc. This gives it that warm reddish color when new. It weighs 3.11 grams and measures 19 millimeters across. It feels solid in the hand compared to modern zinc pennies introduced in the 1980s. On the front, Lincoln's calm, thoughtful expression faces right. Above his head are the words "In God We Trust." To the left is "Liberty." To the right is the date, 1972. On coins from Philadelphia, there's no mint mark below the date, and that's exactly how it should be. On the back, the Lincoln Memorial stands tall, with United States of America across the top, EPLURIBUSUNUM just below it, and 1 cent at the bottom. So visually, a normal 1972 penny looks almost identical to pennies from nearby years. But what makes this year special is what happened during production. During the early 1970s, the U.S. Mint was producing massive quantities of coins to keep up with demand. Machines ran constantly, dies were replaced quickly, and quality control, while still present, wasn't perfect. That's how rare varieties like the 1972 double die escaped into circulation. And unlike some coin errors that only affect a handful of pieces, experts believe around 20,000 of these double die 1972 pennies were released. That might sound like a lot, but compared to nearly 3 billion coins made, it's incredibly rare. Even more amazing is that many of them were used in everyday transactions and worn down before anyone realized what they were. Finding one today in high condition is extremely difficult. So why is this penny valuable? It comes down to 3 things: visibility, demand, and history. First, the doubling is strong and easy to see. Unlike subtle errors that require magnification or expert training, many people can spot a genuine 1972 double die with the naked eye. That makes it exciting for everyday collectors and casual treasure hunters. Second, demand is high. Lincoln cents are one of the most widely collected coin series in the world. Millions of people collect them by date and mint mark. And within that hobby, famous errors like the 1972 double die are considered crown jewels. Third, the story matters. This coin represents a moment when a massive mistake slipped through one of the largest mints in the world and quietly created thousands of valuable collectibles that sat unnoticed in change jars for years. Now let's talk about real money. In circulated condition, meaning the coin has been used, and shows where an authentic 1972 double die penny typically sells for anywhere between $200 and $500. If it's in better shape, with sharper details and less wear, prices can rise to $1,000 or more. In uncirculated condition, meaning the coin never entered circulation, prices can climb dramatically. Certified examples graded by professional services have sold for several $1,000s. And in top condition, with strong luster and crisp details, some examples have sold for over $10,000 at auction. One famous sale involved a high-grade specimen that brought more than $14,000, stunning collectors and reminding everyone that incredible value can hide in the smallest places. Even regular 1972 pennies without errors can have modest value in perfect condition. A shiny, uncirculated example might sell for a few dollars, especially if it has strong red color and no spots or stains. But it's the double die that truly captures attention and wallets. So how do you identify a real one? First, check the date. Look closely at the 1972. On a genuine double die, you'll see clear doubling on the numbers, especially the 2 and 9. It should look like two impressions slightly offset, not fuzzy or smeared. Next, look at the word Liberty. The letters should appear doubled, especially the B and E, then check in God WE Trust. The words should show strong separation, not just thick lettering. It's important to understand that many coins show something called machine doubling. This happens when the coin shifts slightly during striking, creating flat, shelf-like edges on letters. That's not the same as a doubled die, and it carries no extra value. True doubled dies show rounded, raised doubling that looks like a second image, not damage. Weight and color should match a normal copper penny from the early 1970s. If something looks off, too light, wrong color, or oddly shaped, that's a red flag. Because this variety is so valuable, fake or altered examples do exist. Some people try to carve or manipulate numbers to mimic doubling. Others attempt to glue images or chemically alter coins. That's why serious collectors recommend having any suspected example authenticated by a professional grading service before selling or buying. Now let's look at some fun and surprising facts about the 1972 penny. One of the most interesting details is that this double die wasn't discovered immediately. It took several years before collectors realized what they were seeing. By then, many of the coins had already been worn down or lost forever. Another fun fact is that multiple double dies exist for 1972, but only one is considered the major variety, the famous double die obverse known as F-101. Other minor double dies from that year exist, but they're much weaker and less valuable. It's also fascinating that despite being one of the most dramatic double dies ever produced, this coin was struck at the busiest mint in the country, during one of the most high-volume years in penny production. It's a reminder that even in massive industrial systems, small mistakes can slip through and sometimes become priceless. And here's something that surprises many people. Some of these coins are still out there. Not all have been found. Not all have been graded. Some may still be sitting in old jars, forgotten drawers, inherited collections, or dusty boxes in basements. That possibility is part of what keeps collectors searching. Now let's talk about why collectors love this coin today. First, it's accessible. Unlike ultra-rare gold coins or ancient coins that cost tens of thousands of dollars, the 1972 double die penny can sometimes be found in circulation or in old rolls. That creates excitement. It feels like a real treasure hunt. Second, it's visually impressive. The doubling is bold and dramatic, making it easy to show to others and instantly understand why it's special. That makes it a favorite among beginner and experienced collectors alike. Third, it has historical importance. This coin represents one of the most famous mint errors of the modern era, alongside legends like the 1955 double die and the 1969's double die. Owning one feels like owning a piece of minting history. And finally, it carries hope. Hope that something ordinary can turn out to be extraordinary. Hope that something overlooked can hold real value. That emotional connection is powerful, and it's part of what makes coin collecting more than just a hobby. But even if you don't find the double die, the regular 1972 penny still holds meaning. It's a piece of everyday American life from over 50 years ago. It passed through countless hands during a time of cultural change. It sat in pockets during road trips, grocery runs, and school lunches. Every coin carries a story, even the common ones. So next time you see a penny dated 1972 with no mint mark, don't dismiss it. Take a closer look, tilt it under the light, study the date, look at the letters. Because in rare cases, you might be holding one of the most famous pennies ever struck, a coin that turned spare change into serious money. And even if it's not the double die, you'll still be holding a small copper time capsule from another era, a reminder that history often hides in plain sight. The 1972 no mint mark Lincoln penny teaches us something powerful. Value isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's subtle, and sometimes it's sitting unnoticed at the bottom of a jar, waiting for someone curious enough to look closely. So the next time you hear coins clink in your pocket, pause for a moment. Because one of them, just one, could carry a story worth far more than its face value. And the only way to find out is to look. Most people would never stop to look at a 1979 penny. But what if I told you that one small detail on this coin could make the difference between pocket change and something collectors actually search for? Today, we're uncovering the story of the 1979 D Lincoln penny, a coin that looks ordinary at first glance, yet carries hidden history, surprising facts, and a few versions that have sparked real interest in the coin world. The 1979 D Lincoln penny is a 1-cent coin struck at the Denver Mint in 1979. The small letter D, just below the year, tells us where it was made. This penny features the familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the front and the Lincoln Memorial on the back, a design Americans had been seeing for decades by that point. It's the kind of coin many people have in jars, drawers, or old coffee cans. But as with many everyday coins, some examples stand out far more than others. To understand this penny, we need to step back to the late 1970s. America was going through a time of change. Inflation was high, gas prices were rising, and the country was still adjusting after major economic shifts earlier in the decade. The U.S. Mint was producing massive numbers of coins to keep up with everyday commerce. Pennies were used constantly, especially for small purchases and change-making, so production was heavy. In 1979, the Denver Mint alone struck well over 4 billion Lincoln cents. That number alone explains why most 1979 D pennies are common today. But it also tells us something important. When billions of coins are made, small variations, mistakes, and unusual conditions are almost guaranteed to happen. And for collectors, that's where the excitement begins. The design of the 1979 D penny is classic and familiar. On the front, or obverse, is Victor David Brenner's portrait of Abraham Lincoln, first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. By 1979, this design had been in use for 70 years, making it one of the longest-running coin portraits in U.S. history. On the back, or reverse, is the Lincoln Memorial, a design introduced in 1959. If you look closely, you can even see a tiny statue of Lincoln inside the memorial between the columns, making this one of the few U.S. coins to show the same person on both sides. Above the memorial are the words United States of America, and below it is 1 cent. The metal composition of the 1979 D penny is another important detail. These coins are made mostly of zinc with a thin copper coating. Earlier pennies, made before 1982, were mostly solid copper, but by the late 1970s, rising copper prices were making it expensive to produce cents from traditional materials. So the mint was preparing for a major change that would officially happen in the early 1980s. The 1979 penny still looks like classic copper, but inside, it's a different story. Most 1979 D pennies are worth exactly 1 cent in everyday condition. But collectors don't look at coins the same way people at a checkout counter do. They care about condition, rarity, and unusual details. And in high grades, even common coins can become surprisingly valuable. A regular 1979 D penny that's been circulated, with scratches, dull color, and worn details, is usually only worth face value. But an uncirculated example, one that never entered circulation and still has its original mint shine, can be worth several cents to a few dollars, depending on condition. In top-grade examples, certified by professional grading services, some 1979 D pennies have sold for much more than most people would expect. But the real intrigue begins with errors and varieties. Errors happen when something goes wrong during the minting process. This can include off-center strikes, double strikes, clip planchets, or weak impressions. While most error coins are caught and destroyed, a small number escape into circulation. And when collectors find them, they can become highly desirable. One known type of error seen on 1979 D pennies is the off-center strike. This happens when the blank coin planchet isn't properly aligned in the press, causing the design to be struck partially off the coin. Depending on how off-center the strike is and whether the date and mint mark are still visible, these coins can sell for anywhere from tens to hundreds of dollars. Another interesting error is the double strike, where a coin is struck more than once by the dies, creating overlapping images. These can look dramatic and are always eye-catching. Collectors pay strong premiums for well-defined examples, especially when the date and D mint mark are clearly visible. There are also weak strikes and die cracks found on some 1979 D pennies. Die cracks happen when the metal dies used to strike coins develop small fractures, leaving raised lines on the coin's surface. While minor die cracks usually add only modest value, dramatic ones can attract serious collector interest. Now let's talk about real-world value examples. A standard uncirculated 1979 D penny graded MS65 by a professional grading service might sell for a few dollars. But in higher grades, such as MS67 or better, prices can rise sharply. In past auctions, top-condition 1979 D pennies have sold for over $100, sometimes more, simply because so few examples survive in near-perfect shape. Error coins, of course, can bring much higher prices. Off-center strikes from this year and mint have sold for $50, $100, and sometimes even more, depending on the severity and eye appeal. A well-defined double-struck example can command similar prices. While these aren't million-dollar coins, they're far from pocket change, and that's what makes searching through old pennies exciting. You might be wondering, how do you tell if your 1979 D penny is special or just ordinary? The first thing to check is the mint mark. Look just below the date on the front of the coin. If you see a small D, that means it was minted in Denver. If there's no mint mark, it came from Philadelphia, and if there's an S, it was struck in San Francisco, often for collector sets. Next, look at the condition. Does the coin still have bright, original luster? Are Lincoln's hair details sharp? Can you clearly see the lines in the memorial columns on the reverse? The fewer scratches and marks, the better the condition, and the higher the potential value. Then examine the coin closely for errors. Look for doubling in the letters or numbers, off-center designs, missing details, or unusual shapes. A magnifying glass or coin loop can help. If something looks strange or different compared to other pennies from the same year, it's worth researching further or having it checked by a professional. As for counterfeits, they're not common for 1979 D pennies because most examples aren't extremely valuable. Still, altered coins do exist. Some people try to add or remove mint marks to make coins appear rarer than they are. Under magnification, fake mint marks often look rough, uneven, or incorrectly placed. On genuine coins, the mint mark is cleanly struck and matches the style used by the mint that year. Here's a fun fact about the Lincoln Memorial reverse. In 1979, this design was only a few decades away from retirement, though no one knew it at the time. In 2009, the Mint replaced it with special designs to celebrate Lincoln's life, and then in 2010 introduced the Union Shield reverse. That means the 1979 D penny belongs to the final era of memorial cents, making it part of a design tradition that lasted exactly 50 years. Another interesting detail is how many of these pennies are still out there. Because billions were made, they're still commonly found in circulation today. That makes them perfect for beginner collectors and treasure hunters. Anyone can start searching pocket change and roll boxes from banks, hoping to spot an unusually sharp example or a rare error. Collectors love the 1979 D penny not because it's rare in the traditional sense, but because it represents something familiar, approachable, and full of possibility. It's a reminder that valuable coins aren't always ancient, gold, or dramatic looking. Sometimes, they're the same humble pennies people have been spending without a second thought for decades. There's also something special about collecting coins from your own lifetime or recent history. Many people who grew up in the late 1970s and early 1980s remember using these exact pennies as kids. Holding one today can bring back memories of candy stores, arcade games, and simple everyday moments. That emotional connection adds another layer of appeal. And then there's the thrill of the hunt. Even though most 1979 D pennies are common, the chance of finding a top-grade example or an exciting error keeps collectors searching. Every roll of pennies holds the possibility of something unexpected, and when you do find something unusual, it feels like uncovering a small piece of hidden history. One surprising detail is how small differences in condition can make a huge difference in value. Two pennies from the same year and mint can look similar at a glance, yet one might be worth 1 cent while the other sells for $50 or more, simply because it has sharper details, cleaner surfaces, and better overall eye appeal. That's why collectors pay close attention to preservation and handling. Another fun point is that the Denver Mint has long been known for producing high-quality strikes, especially compared to some other mints during certain years. Many collectors enjoy comparing Denver and Philadelphia coins from the same year to spot subtle differences in sharpness and appearance. The 1979 D penny also sits at an interesting moment in U.S. coinage history. It's one of the last Lincoln cents made before the switch to zinc-based cores became standard. While the change wouldn't officially happen until 1982, the late 1970s were already signaling the end of the classic copper era. That gives this coin a quiet historical significance that often goes unnoticed. So why do collectors still care about a coin that's usually worth just a penny? Because it represents possibility. It's easy to obtain, easy to study, and sometimes, if you're lucky, surprisingly rewarding. It reminds us that history isn't only found in museums or vaults. Sometimes, it's hiding in a jar on your dresser or a handful of change from the grocery store. The 1979 D Lincoln penny may not be the most famous coin in American history, but it has its own story to tell. It reflects a time of economic change, a long-running design tradition, and the everyday life of millions of Americans. And in rare cases, it offers collectors a chance to discover something special in the most unexpected place. So the next time you see a penny dated 1979 with a small D beneath the year, don't rush past it. Take a closer look. Check its condition. Look for something unusual, because sometimes the most ordinary-looking coins are the ones with the most interesting stories hiding just beneath the surface. And who knows? The next one you find might be more than just spare change. What if the penny sitting quietly in your pocket right now is worth far more than 1 cent, and you've never even noticed it? Some of the most surprising coin discoveries don't happen in vaults or museums. They happen on kitchen tables, in old jars, and inside forgotten change drawers. And today, we're diving into one of those coins that looks ordinary at first glance, but carries a story that few people ever hear. The 1981 no-mint mark Lincoln penny. At first glance, this coin looks just like countless other pennies Americans have handled for decades. Abraham Lincoln's calm profile on the front, the Lincoln Memorial on the back, a small copper-colored coin that seems too common to matter. But hidden inside this everyday design is a moment in U.S. history when American money quietly changed forever. And the 1981 no-mint mark penny sits right at the edge of that transformation. Let's start with what this coin actually is. A 1981 no-mint mark Lincoln penny was struck in Philadelphia, where coins traditionally carried no mint mark at all. If you see a small D, that means Denver. An S means San Francisco, but no letter under the date means Philadelphia, and in 1981, that still meant massive production numbers. Over 4 billion pennies were struck that year across all mints. So why are collectors still paying attention to this one? To understand that, we need to go back to the early 1980s, a time when America wasn't just changing socially and politically, but financially too. Inflation had pushed the price of copper to historic highs. Suddenly, it was costing the U.S. Mint more than 1 cent to make a 1-cent coin. That created a serious problem. You can't run a currency system if every penny loses money before it ever reaches circulation. So the mint began experimenting. For over a century, U.S. pennies were made mostly of copper, about 95% copper with small amounts of tin and zinc. But in the early 1980s, officials started testing cheaper alternatives. The solution was a zinc core coated with copper, a penny that looked the same but cost far less to produce. And here's where 1981 becomes special. It's one of the final full years when pennies were still officially made entirely from copper. In 1982, both copper and zinc versions were struck. After that, copper pennies disappeared from everyday circulation. That means the 1981 no-mint mark penny represents the end of an era, the last chapter of America's true copper cent. That alone gives the coin historical importance. But collectors don't stop there. They look closely at how these coins were made, how they survived, and whether anything unusual happened during production. The design of the 1981 penny features Victor David Brenner's famous portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the front, a design first introduced in 1909 to honor Lincoln's 100th birthday. It was the first time a real person ever appeared on a U.S. coin meant for circulation. On the back, the Lincoln Memorial design, introduced in 1959, shows the famous monument in Washington, D.C., and if you look carefully, you can even see a tiny statue of Lincoln inside the memorial. Now let's talk metal. Every genuine 1981 penny should weigh about 3.11 grams and be composed of about 95% copper. That makes it noticeably heavier than later zinc pennies, which weigh only 2.5 grams. Many collectors use this simple weight test to instantly tell if they're holding a Premonus 1982 copper cent or a later zinc version. But here's where things get interesting. Even though billions of 1981 pennies were struck, not all of them survived in great condition. Most went straight into circulation, got scratched, worn, stained, or damaged over decades of use. Finding one today that still looks brand new, with full shine, sharp details, and no wear is surprisingly difficult. And in the coin world, condition is everything. A circulated 1981 penny might be worth 1 or 2 cents. But in high-grade condition, the value rises sharply. Pennies graded mint state 65 or higher by professional grading services can sell for several dollars, sometimes more. And the rarest examples, nearly flawless coins with full luster and no marks, have sold for significantly higher amounts at auction. But condition isn't the only thing collectors look for. Errors and unusual varieties can turn an ordinary penny into a serious collectible. Some 1981 pennies were struck slightly off-center, meaning the design isn't perfectly aligned on the coin. Others show doubled lettering, where parts of the design appear faintly doubled due to misalignment during the die-making process. There are also examples with clipped planchets, where a piece of metal was missing before striking, creating a curved or straight cut on the coin's edge. These kinds of errors aren't common, but they do exist, and when they're genuine, collectors pay attention. Depending on the type and severity of the error, values can range from tens to hundreds of dollars, sometimes more if the error is dramatic and well preserved. Now let's talk about real-world value examples. In recent years, professionally graded 1981 no-mint mark pennies in high mint state condition have sold for anywhere between $5 and $50, depending on grade. Exceptional examples graded MS67 red, meaning they show full original copper color with no noticeable wear, have reached over $100 at auction. Error coins from this year, especially those with strong doubling or dramatic off-center strikes, have sold for several $100s when verified and graded. That might not sound life-changing, but remember, we're talking about a penny most people ignore. A coin pulled from a jar, pocket, or inherited collection can suddenly become a valuable piece of history. And for many collectors, the thrill isn't just in the money, it's in the discovery. So how can you tell if your 1981 no-mint mark penny is real and potentially valuable? First, check the date. It should clearly read 1981. Then look under the date. If there's no letter, it was struck in Philadelphia. Next, weigh it if possible. A genuine copper 1981 penny should weigh about 3.11 grams. If it's closer to 2.5 grams, something's wrong, either it's damaged or altered. Then examine the condition. Look at Lincoln's hair, cheek, and jawline. On high-grade coins, these details should be sharp and clean. Check the reverse. The steps of the Lincoln Memorial and the columns should be well-defined, not flattened or worn. Finally, look for anything unusual doubling on letters, numbers that seem thick or shadowed, designs that look off-center, or shapes that don't match normal coins. If something seems strange, it might be worth having a professional take a look. As for counterfeits, fake 1981 pennies are rare because the coin itself isn't extremely expensive, but altered coins do exist. Some people try to plate zinc pennies or modify dates on other years to resemble more valuable varieties. That's why weight, magnet tests, and professional grading matter when dealing with higher-end examples. Now here's something surprising. Many people assume that older always means more valuable, but with pennies, that's not always true. Some pennies from the 1940s and 1950s are common and inexpensive, while certain later dates, like 1981, stand out because they mark important transitions in American coinage. The 1981 penny is the last year when every penny was officially copper. That makes it the final chapter in a story that began in 1793 with the very first U.S. cent. From the early large cents of the 1700s to the Indian head cents of the 1800s to Lincoln pennies of the 1900s, copper had always been the heart of America's smallest coin. And 1981 quietly closed that chapter. Here's another fun detail. If you line up a 1981 copper penny next to a modern zinc penny and gently drop them on a hard surface, you'll hear a difference. The copper penny rings with a sharper, higher sound, while the zinc penny sounds dull and flat. It's a small difference, but it's another reminder that these coins were made from entirely different materials, even though they look almost identical. Another interesting fact is that billions of copper pennies are still sitting in homes across America. Coin jars, piggy banks, dresser drawers, inherited collections, many still contain Preminus 1982 cents that people never separated. Some collectors even sort pennies by weight or sound to isolate copper examples. And among those, the 1981 no-mint mark penny is often one of the most common copper survivors, but also one of the most overlooked. Collectors love this coin not because it's the rarest penny ever made, but because it represents a turning point. It's the last of something. And in collecting, last issues often matter just as much as first issues. It's also popular with beginner collectors. Unlike extremely rare coins that cost thousands of dollars, the 1981 penny is affordable, accessible, and easy to find. That makes it perfect for new collectors learning how to grade coins, spot errors, and understand how condition affects value. Yet high-grade examples still challenge even experienced collectors to find truly flawless specimens. For some collectors, the appeal is emotional. This is the kind of coin they handled as children, the penny they found on sidewalks, the coin they dropped into arcade machines or candy dispensers. Owning a perfect 1981 copper penny feels like holding a piece of everyday American life, frozen in time before the material of the nation's smallest coin quietly changed forever. And that's what makes this coin special. It isn't flashy. It isn't gold. It isn't rare in the way some coins are. But it carries history, not loud history, but quiet history. The kind that slips into circulation unnoticed, then decades later becomes a symbol of change. So next time you see a penny dated 1981, don't ignore it. Pick it up. Turn it over. Weigh it if you can. Look closely at the details. Because in that small piece of copper, you're holding one of the final chapters of America's classic penny story, a coin from the last year before everything changed. And who knows? The next time you dig into an old jar of change, you might not just find loose coins. You might find history. You might find something overlooked. You might even find a small treasure hiding in plain sight. Because sometimes, the most ordinary coins turn out to be the most fascinating. Have you ever looked at a penny and wondered if it could secretly be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars? What if I told you that one of the most confusing pennies in American history came from 1982, and some of its versions are now turning everyday pocket change into serious money? Today, we're diving into the story of the 1982 D Mint Mark Lincoln penny. At first glance, it looks like just another brown copper coin. But behind this simple cent is a dramatic moment in U.S. history, a major change in how money was made, and a group of rare varieties that collectors hunt for every day. This coin was struck in Denver, which is why it carries the small D mint mark just below the year on the front. It features Abraham Lincoln's portrait on the front and the Lincoln Memorial on the back, a design Americans saw on pennies for nearly 50 years. But what makes the 1982 D penny special isn't the design. It's what's inside the coin and how that changed everything. To understand why this penny matters, we have to travel back to the early 1980s. By then, copper prices were rising fast. The metal inside U.S. pennies was becoming more expensive than the coin's face value. In other words, it was costing more than 1 cent to make a penny. That was a serious problem for the U.S. Mint. For decades, pennies had been made of mostly copper. From 1909 through 1982, Lincoln's cents were about 95% copper, with a small amount of zinc mixed in for strength. But by 1982, copper prices were so high that the mint needed a cheaper alternative. That year, the mint made a historic decision. They switched to zinc-based pennies coated with a thin layer of copper. And here's where things get fascinating. Instead of making a clean switch, the mint produced both copper and zinc pennies in the same year. That means 1982 pennies exist in multiple metal types, multiple designs, and multiple variations, making it one of the most complex years in modern U.S. coinage. Now let's focus on the Denver Mint. The 1982 D penny is especially interesting because Denver struck both copper and zinc versions, and some rare varieties slipped through during this chaotic transition. That combination of confusion, metal change, and production pressure created coins that collectors still chase today. At first glance, all 1982 D pennies look nearly identical, but their weight tells a different story. Copper versions weigh about 3.11 grams. Zinc versions weigh about 2.5 grams. That small difference can mean a huge change in value, especially if you find a rare version that was never supposed to exist. Design-wise, the coin shows Lincoln facing right, with the words "In God We Trust" along the top, Liberty on the left, and the date on the right. Below the date is the D mint mark, showing it was struck in Denver. On the back, you'll see the Lincoln Memorial with 1 cent and United States of America around it. But in 1982, there was another major change. The shape of the numbers in the date changed mid-year. Some pennies show a thicker, bolder date style, known as large date, while others show a slimmer style called small date. Most people never notice this difference, but collectors care deeply about it. So now we have multiple combinations: copper large date, copper small date, zinc large date, and zinc small date. But here's where the mystery deepens. According to official mint records, the Denver Mint was only supposed to strike large date coins in 1982, not small date ones. Yet a few 1982D small date pennies exist, and those are among the rarest modern Lincoln cents ever discovered. That makes the 1982D small date copper penny one of the holy grails of penny collecting. Only a tiny number have been confirmed, and every verified example has caused excitement across the coin world. These coins weren't supposed to exist at all, which makes them accidental treasures. Most 1982D pennies you'll find are zinc large date coins worth just face value. But a copper version, especially with the rare small date style, can be worth thousands, even tens of thousands of dollars, depending on condition and certification. So how can something so common suddenly become so valuable? It all comes down to mistakes, transitions, and scarcity. When the mint switches materials or designs, unexpected combinations can slip through. In 1982, production lines were changing fast. Dies were being replaced, metal blanks were mixed, and in that chaos, a few coins were born that collectors would later treasure. Let's talk about real-world values. Most circulated 1982D zinc pennies are worth exactly 1 cent. Copper versions in average condition might bring a few cents to $1, but rare varieties tell a different story. Certified examples of the 1982D small date copper penny have sold for over $10,000. In some cases, depending on grade and eye appeal, prices have climbed even higher. These aren't theoretical values. These are actual auction results from serious collectors competing for coins that almost never appear on the market. Even non-rare varieties can gain value in high condition. A flawless, uncirculated 1982D large date penny, graded at the highest levels, can sell for $50 to $150 or more. That may not sound life-changing, but it's a huge return for something that once sat in pocket change. So how do you know what you have? First, check the mint mark. Look under the date. If there's a D, it's from Denver. Next, weigh the coin. This is the most important step. If it weighs about 3.11 grams, it's copper. If it weighs around 2.5 grams, it's zinc. A digital jewelry scale works perfectly for this. Then look at the date style. On large date coins, the 8 in 1982 looks wider and rounder, and the 2 has a curved tail. On small date coins, the numbers look thinner, and the 2 has a sharper, straighter tail. Comparing your coin to online images can make this much easier. If you find a 1982D penny that weighs like copper and appears to have a small date style, stop immediately. Do not clean it. Do not polish it. Do not alter it. That coin could be extremely rare, and cleaning it can destroy its value. Instead, place it in a protective holder and consider professional authentication. It's also important to watch out for fakes. Some people try to plate zinc coins with copper or alter dates to mimic rare versions. A real copper penny will weigh correctly and show natural wear patterns. Professional grading services can confirm authenticity, metal composition, and variety, which is critical for high-value coins. Now here's something surprising. Many people still carry 1982 pennies in their change every day without realizing it. Because most of them are common, they pass unnoticed. But the rare varieties hide.